Hi Gary, it's great to see you. So these are one of our Talking Head sessions that we just talk about topics that might be affecting the sector. And today we're talking about AI and the effect that that might have on the sector. And recently, I think it was actually earlier in the year, there was an article which Wonky produced, which said an avalanche really is coming this time, referring specifically to AI and the impact on the sector of AI. And there's been lots of reports about the impact of AI and tech specifically beyond the sector and the sector itself, and including some which have really been criticism of AI and really it being a threat to the sector. At the same time, we've got academics who are in the sector who are leading on research into the area and the developments and groundbreaking developments that we've seen over the past few years, and most recently in relation to generative AI. And so there's lots of things to think about that we've been talking to clients about, both in respect of teaching and assessment, retaining academic integrity, access to the sector and to education, the role of the academic and that being changing, and perhaps things that we've used AI for perhaps more established, so in terms of back office use of data and analysis, as well as what I've said about the research into it. From your perspective in your work with the sector and you talking to clients, I mean, do you think an avalanche is coming or has come, or what do you think is happening?
Thank you very much, Sian, for that helpful introduction and overview. I suppose from my perspective, in many ways, AI is not new to the higher education sector, and institutions, I think, have been grappling with how to make the best use of this emerging technology for some while. But I suppose in our discussions with colleagues in the sector, when ChatGPT came on the scene, there really did seem to be a proliferation of views and almost a polarization of views. On the one hand, is this some kind of fundamental threat to the very concept of scholarship? Or, on the other hand, is it a great tool, or at least a necessary tool, which needs to be harnessed? So we had those two sort of views, and probably it helps, I think, if we break it down a little bit into the key components of sort of the different functions. So the research function of a university, the teaching and learning function, and linked to that is the assessment side of things. Yeah. And there's just been a great article in The Economist very recently looking at some of the real opportunities there could be for speeding up and greater productivity for research in higher education. So that's fantastic. But I suppose the biggest challenge that we hear about is around the assessment side, because fundamental to a university is the fact that students, and in fact researchers as well, this must be somebody's own work. And how do you get around that issue if a computer has generated the work and if somebody hands it in purporting it to be their own? And I think that's the biggest challenge. But on the staff side of things, there must be a number of discussions that you've come across as well.
Yes, I think it's really a continuation of the evolving role of an academic member of staff, isn't it? And I think it's historically it's been about an educator and a research, although there's been a move towards more teaching focused colleagues. But I think that is an increase in relation to collaboration, isn't there? And then being a collaborator, then being an industry partner, then being a protector of well-being, both in respect of students and also staff who they might manage. And now we're looking at perhaps moving to be a kind of AI tech expert as part of their role as well. And I think talking about from our perspective in terms of the framework and the policies and the regulations around that, then that all needs to be considered. And there's probably, from what I've been talking to clients about, there's probably kind of 4 areas really. So the first one is around reward and recognition and kind of performance management really. And so that needs to be based on a different approach really, and one that embraces AI and also focuses on the human and empathy elements that perhaps can't be created from AI, and so that the role survives really. And so when it comes to teaching and research, the practical application of that needs to be what's rewarded and recognised for a role and as an academic, beyond the kind of essays and the lectures, and so kind of higher level teaching experience, and that actually being the lecture being rewarded and the performance being a promotion criteria being aligned to that as criteria. And I suppose the second one is in relation to the teaching and learning aspect. And so both from the perspective of what I've just said in terms of enriching learning and it having the opportunity to enrich learning. And so dealing with a basic level of learning. So what can you add in terms of the learning to that from a human perspective? But then the other element from an academic perspective is really their responsibility for ensuring that it's used responsibly by both them as researchers and in their own teaching, but also by students, and ensuring that students are educated about the risks and biases that might be created in using this tool. And frameworks, universities will have to look at around frameworks around that as to what they can and can't use it for, both the students and both the academics, in relation to teaching and learning. And then, as you said, assessment is a really key one, isn't it, in terms of the third element, as there need to be clear frameworks around that, about its use in assessment, both from a perspective of using the tool to assess work, but also actually what can it be used for in terms of creation of work, and making sure that there's tools to police, dare I say, or at least identify when it has been used, and making sure that that's retains academic integrity, like we've said, in a similar way to Turnitin software or other tools that have been used in the past to identify plagiarism. And then finally, as you said, the article in The Economist and research, I think, is probably the most exciting one. Not only are the universities researching around this, but there are so many opportunities in relation to beyond data analysis, but also around collaboration around research and using AI platforms to collaborate around research. And Ref 2028, the guidance, the new guidance and the direction of travel indicates that collaboration is going to be really important. It's more about the institution's impact and the institution's contribution rather than individual academics. So that really is AI can really be a tool to facilitate that kind of collaboration. But I think from our perspective, it means that codes of conduct are going to kind of have to be reviewed and looked at that, aren't they, to identify what is good use of AI and what perhaps might constitute misconduct in AI. So yeah, there's lots to think about, I think, and I think they're engaging with it already as a sector. We've seen the Russell Group guiding principles come out. I mean, what do you see in terms of legislation and regulation around it from your perspective, Gary, that might affect the sector?
Thanks, Sian. It's quite tricky to sort of look into the crystal ball and see the future on this, because the technology really is moving so fast. And I think ChatGPT came out at the end of 2022, and there are new iterations of the technology already. So legislation, I think, is quite clunky. It takes a long time for legislation to be brought about, and then does it really address the need in question? Now, there is some provision in our existing data protection legislation around automated decisions and profiling, as they call it, but that doesn't scratch the surface when it comes to the scope of what generative AI can do. And sometimes legislation is necessary. So last year, legislation was passed to try and tackle issues around cheating services, as it's called. But it's a bit of a sledgehammer, and it doesn't move very quickly. So then one thinks about, well, regulation. Is this another area that the sector's regulator, the Office for Students, might be asked at some point to get involved with? But some would say the OFS perhaps goes too far already. But I think the key, probably the most adaptable way of sort of having some kind of oversight of what's going on, is through sort of principles-based guidance. And you mentioned the Russell Group guidance. And there's some other good material coming out now from the Quality Assurance Agency and JISC. And that may well, help everyone to be a bit more nimble-footed and have a sort of values-based, a principles-based approach to not letting this sort of run away with itself, as it were. And it may be, I hope, that there's a consultation that the Department for Education put out recently on this, and hopefully there'll be some good sharing of information about how the education sector more generally can go ahead and think about this, so we get the maximum benefit, but also, you know, have one eye to the risks. I suppose the key thing from my perspective at the moment is that maybe every institution should check their academic regulations to see what they say, and is the use of this technology, which side of the line is it, and are those regulations clear enough so that students and others know what the rules of the game are in using this this technology. I think that was a key thing that can be done at the moment. So thank you, Sian, for our discussion. I'll hand back to you to draw us to a close. Thank you.
You know, I think you're right in terms of nimble-footed. So principles is perhaps the way to go, isn't it? As long as it provides enough clarity for those that need to navigate it at the institutions. But it will be interesting to see that. I think the call for evidence closed in August, didn't it, for the government? So it'll be interesting to see what comes out with that. And from my perspective, there's also things going on in terms of employment law, so they'll interrelate. But I think it's something that universities will continue to engage with, and luckily are starting to see it as a massive opportunity. I don't think it's going to be a threat to academics or the sector in the way that some have perhaps criticised. It's more something to get on board with and see how it can be used to enhance the sector. So as long as it's with eyes opened and appropriate framework. So good to speak. Thanks, Gary.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sian. Bye for now.